Okay, so I don't know if you guys saw, but Trump was giving a brief 20 minutes interview to the press while, you know, going through travel with Air Force One. So this was not a, say, like a big presser that he probably did a bunch of training for, or not. I mean, Trump doesn't want to do a bunch of training, but like went through some notes for beforehand for, or some big podium where he took question after question. This is like a brief, like he's sticking his head out of the door, and you can even see it here, sticking his head out the door, talking to the press, then going back to traveling and doing the work of the president of the United States. You know, when the president like gets off the tarmac and all the journalists are screaming for them, it's that level of interaction with the press where it's off the cuff answers, right? So the reason I'm explaining this is to give you a framework for this answer, that this isn't some official proposal that was made at some conference. This was not something that was prepared by the Trump team, say Marco Rubio, who has recently been confirmed as his new Secretary of State, Pete Hegseth, Defense Secretary, or anybody else within his inner circle had proposed a deal and now he's formally proposing it, or they're like, okay, we're going to give you this deal, go, you know, propose it to the public. This is something that maybe they said go test the waters with it. That would be the only thing I could imagine, but an informal, off the cuff, just throwing a deal out there. I want to give that much context. I'm stressing this point because the gravity of what Trump said or supposedly said, depending on your interpretation and how much you want to stretch yourself so the indomitable and unconquerable spirit of hope is not crushed in your soul when you hear the tone of what's being talked about and the worst fears of those who want Palestinian sovereignty. Trump, while getting through this travel arrangement, threw out the idea of quote unquote cleaning out Gaza, moving 1.5 million people, so 1.5 million people, which is the vast majority of Gaza's population, outside of maybe, I mean, I think others have already been displaced, but I mean, the pre-war population was 2 million. So the vast majority of the population you'd be moving out, if not in its entirety, and then taking them and moving them to Egypt or Jordan and building new houses there because the destruction in Gaza is so total, so horrible that, you know, why rebuild there? Rebuild in these new places that they could settle. And when I say clean out, the reason I'm saying cleaning out is because that's the word Trump used. This is not me engaging in like paraphrasing. This is his language. Let's listen. It's kind of hard to hear because not the best audio equipment.
I'm talking to General LCC tomorrow sometime, I believe. And I'd like Egypt to take people, and I'd like Jordan to take people. I mean, you're talking about probably 1.5 million people. And we just clean out that whole thing. It's, you know, it's over the centuries, that's many, many conflicts that site. And I don't know, it's something has to happen, but it's literally a demolition site right now. Almost everything's demolished, and people are dying there. So I'd rather get involved with some of the Arab nations and build housing in a different location where they can maybe live in peace for a change. Temporarily, or would they?
So the way he's talking about this, you know, to skip the Trumpisms and to summarize, right? Destruction in Gaza is total. It's awful. It's terrible. We need to work to take the people of Gaza and move them out to other countries, Arab nations that he'll work with in the region, like Egypt and Jordan, which are American allies. And Egypt was one of the few countries that when Trump did that freeze on military aid, it was Egypt and Israel, which were the two that he did not freeze the shipments of aid. Not, I'm talking about like U.S. aid, not, for example, the military aid program to Ukraine. That is still unfrozen. But he would have those Arab nations take those people because, and its justification, A, the destruction, pre-forementioned destruction, and B, because the violence there had gone on for so long, for generations and generations, and you know, the land of Gaza has just been a death trap, so to speak. And so it is better to take them out of the this ruinous death trap, as in a death trap that is completely ruinous, destroyed, where it's so absolutely decimated, that not only are buildings destroyed from the top down and collapse in on themselves, but many of the dead are still yet undiscovered, rotting in their former homes because there's just so many destroyed buildings, and it happened so quickly that there was not enough time to clear it all out. And people simply suffocated in their own homes after they fell on top of them. And with all that destruction and the, I know people talked about Warsaw as a city of bones because everywhere is a graveyard. I don't want to make any comparisons of scale, but right now when you walk through a lot of Palestinian communities, it is literally walking through a graveyard where the graves are the former homes of your neighbors. So it's so destroyed and ruinous, and this has happened for so long that we just should take them out, move them out, because they could maybe live in peace in Jordan. They could maybe live in peace in Egypt. They could maybe live in peace elsewhere, because I, Donald Trump, and this is me now going off on a little bit of a limb, am going to be the one to break this seemingly endless cycle by simply just taking them from here and moving them over here. Now, here's the problem, is that if the policy becomes, and this is hard to say because this is a press gaggle that's very informal, and Trump is not somebody who tends to put his language in the most diplomatic and non-vague terms when discussing, foreign policy issues. Definitely when his advisors are not whispering in his ears and telling him to talk that way or talk that way. It's kind of hard to know exactly if it would be all Palestinians, but the way that it's described here could be realistically interpreted as a program to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip, because it's just so violent and so ruinous, and this has happened for so long, that it'd be better to just remove them from their homes, push them somewhere else to live in some other Arab country with, in Trump's mind, the rest of the Arabs, and then we can be done with it. And that not only will the violence be done, and maybe in his mind, Trump is the hero because he's ended the cycle, but then the Israelis can be happy because not only the threat of Hamas has been removed from the Gaza Strip, but this endless cycle has ended, and possibly, likely, in this frame, again, we're just going out on a limb here because this is all just from like a 50-second dribble from a press gaggle, the Israelis would also get to take the land, maybe reintroduce settlers into the Gaza Strip, like some in the fringes of, not even in the fringes anymore. If it's in the government, it's not in the fringes, but in the fringes of maybe Israeli society that have been more normalized due to the war, and now have significant influence with Netanyahu's coalition, want to do. They want to reintroduce settlements, not only into the Gaza Strip, but they want to expand settlements in the West Bank. And they also are developing plans to double the amount of settlements in the Golan Heights. And let me just say, if this is the plan that we go through, I don't know how to properly get across the pain and anguish of people suffering for over a year and a half in their homes, connecting so much blood and tears and community and uplifting. Think of all the ambulance drivers in Gaza who through the last year and a half have continued to work. Think of the medical professionals. Think of the people who stayed in their homes and somehow survived, even if at times it was out of pride or out of having nowhere to go, whatever that decision, but did and somehow made it through it all. Or the people who have been waiting tirelessly to go home as the most displaced community in the world. Now we're going to displace more of them. The solution to this is to take the most displaced community in the world and displace more. And I know that when people talk about, and I hear this like countenance sometimes, like, well, when you say the most displaced, they've been refugees for 60, 70 years. How are they still a refugee? Well, if they're not given citizenship by their host nations, if they're not allowed to integrate into their societies, then we're putting Palestinians between countries. They can't be Jordanians outside of, I believe, certain circumstances, but they can't be Egyptians. They can't be Turks, they can't be Lebanese. They're kept outside of society, both because these states don't want to go through the process of normalization, but they also don't really want to integrate these people into their societies. And within their society, there also can be a decent amount of bigotry around Palestinians and integrating them into their societies. But then they can't go home because many of their homes are long gone or continuing to be either bulldozed and removed or are being blown up in the war. I mean, we're saying that the solution to this conflict is to displace more people and make the pressure cooker that is the Palestinian state of affairs just that much hotter. Not only do I think this is a bad idea because of the humanitarian implications of removing all these people from their homes, presuming that this is not, and I mean, I'm just doing this not even out of naivete, just out of a certain amount of hope, a certain amount of my soul not wanting to accept something, right? Maybe if it was some temporary movement and he meant they're going to make some temporary buildings for them to live in as they rebuild Gaza and then people come home. I mean, it's a 50-second clip. There's so much that you're kind of trying to take from this. It's hard to say. But outside of the humanitarian implications and what would be a gross mass relocation of people, I also don't think it's going to bring about peace. Like, the conflict between Israel and Palestine has not been just constrained to Gaza. Like, there were Fedayeen fighters coming from all across the Middle East. They attacked from across borders of multiple nations that would host them, or they would be able to infiltrate and operate within. And so if you move all these people out of Gaza and you move them into Egypt, you move them into Jordan, how do you not know you're just moving like a line to Jordan? You're just moving the line over to Egypt. I mean, maybe you can negotiate some terms to strengthen the border there, but that's still 1.5 million displaced, angry, hungry people with nowhere to go. And what's going to be the plan? Are we going to make Egypt make Palestinian citizens? Are we going to make these nation states do that? Will they do that? Will they do that? Because they can't just exist as a stateless people forever. That's not bringing about peace. It's just kicking the can down the road and making more people removed and angry because they're not living in their homes. And I mean, people of Gaza were angry before, but I don't think displacing them and moving them from their homes is going to fix any of the problems. I think it could end up, as some of you say in the chat, it could end up inspiring more violence. It could end up inspiring more violence. And at the same time, this came around the same day or within 24 hours of Donald Trump also announcing that he's going to be removing the halt that Biden put in place on the 2,000-pound bombs dropped from, F-16s that we had halted from going to Israel because we didn't want them to use them in the densely populated urban centers in Gaza because they could kill a lot of people in a 3 or 4 story building that doesn't just have either a Hamas fighter or a few Hamas fighters or even a lot of Hamas fighters in it, but also a significant amount of civilians. And look, if you take that decision into consideration, and the position and the deal that's being offered to the Palestinians is the full removal of their people from Gaza. And of course, we don't know that's the formal proposal. But if that is what's moving forward, is a Trumpian position that's based on the Palestinians leaving Gaza, as well as removing the controls on weapon shipments to Israel, while we have, some weeks. We have weeks left in the ceasefire that is holding at a tenuous rate at best. We don't even know if it's going to make the full 6 weeks and we'll go through the entirety of the first phase. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. And even if we do, and we get one of the better case scenarios where it does hold for that time, we do get some humanitarian aid in, there is some respite. Once that clock rings out, it is highly likely that the now rested Israeli forces, how rested, maybe not significantly, but somewhat, will then start a new operation now that it has gotten a certain amount of hostages out. If it does not think it can get the totality of them out, while keeping Hamas, getting Hamas out of power, i.e. that Hamas is not going to hand over the last hostage, because if Hamas hands over the last hostage, they give over one of the last significant pieces of leverage they have, as their command structure has been decimated, their leadership killed, both military and political. Its weapon storage facilities run dry, and the shipments that are coming over the hill, we don't really know, and they don't really know. And while they've been able to try to retain and gain new membership, even though a lot of the old experienced fighters have died in the process, and, you know, replacing an old experienced fighter with a new recruit is not the same thing. You are losing combat power in that instance. They are still fighting. They are still able to fight. And so I could very easily see those conditions coming where they keep those hostages because they don't want to give up Gaza. They don't want to give up control. They're not willing to. And so the war resumes either at the end of the ceasefire period or even before the ceasefire period is over, because the last time we had the ceasefire during late 2023, I believe it was, you know, a few months after the initial shots of the war on October 7th, the ceasefire actually ended early as well. And it's not like ceasefires being broken is something new in, you know, Israeli, Arab, Middle Eastern relations. So this could not only do we see a scary hint towards a possible future Trump framework, we're also getting at the same time that Trump is removing the restrictions Biden placed on the larger, more destructive munitions we were providing for Israel, that could do more destructive in an urban center, as the clock is ticking for the possible resumption of violence in the Gaza Strip, where Hamas and the Israeli government are no closer to putting a final nail in the coffin of this war, as putting it behind us, but a lot more coffins in the ground. It's not good. This is a bad state of affairs. And I think that the path of least resistance is this war resuming in a couple of weeks, and resuming with Trump's possible backing and 2,000 pound bombs in tow. 2,000 pound bombs in tow. The ceasefire is already disintegrating. It was an initial bump, but Trump will continue to lie about the great peace deal he just made. I mean, it will. I mean, it was Biden's framework, but I mean, Trump's election did create a condition for it to go through. But also, Biden's reelection could have also done the same thing. It's hard to say. Either way, though, the peace deal went through under his watch, but I don't think it'll last through March, honestly. Okay, let us move on. Now that we've got that topic out of the way.